Back again. Just gonna wait for to see if some people want to hop on the live before I start talking about today's topic. Also, thank you. Yesterday was my stepmom's birthday in heaven, so I took a sacred pause from the video series, but yeah, we're just gonna give a couple minutes, let a few people hop on before we dive into this very much needed topic. Got my tea today. It's just We are here with the Womb Portal series, and today's topic is wounded feminine versus divine feminine. Gonna get into all the juiciness. I'm actually really excited to dive into this. This is a big one that is not talked about a lot. We see a lot of shaming and blaming and pointing the finger at the masculine and the divine masculine and just men in general. And this is definitely a call of awareness for women as well. Like, we need to hold ourselves accountable, and we need to be responsible with our own energies. So this topic today is really going to dive into the meaning of the wounded feminine and the actual meaning of the divine feminine, and how they actually differ, and how we all women at some point have been this wounded feminine energy, right? And I'm going to share my personal experience of the wounded feminine from my perspective and what I went through. All right, so let's just get right into it. Just like I said, I trust that whoever is meant to see this will see it at the right divine appointed time for them. So whether anyone is alive during this or not does not really matter. The message will reach those who need to hear it. So let's just jump right into it. Okay, the Womb Portal series. Today we're talking about the wounded feminine versus the divine feminine. So again, I just want to state that I'm only speaking from personal experience, right? I'm only speaking from personal experience. So what is the wounded feminine? What is the wounded feminine, right? And we'll kind of just go into a little bit too of, like, you know, it's like slash the toxic feminine when it's not addressed, but we'll just start with the wounded feminine. So the wounded feminine is bitter. She's very bitter. She has a lot of resentment. She is jealous and competitive. And I don't mean like, oh, I like a challenge here and there. I'm talking about competitive to the point where she always has to be the first. She always has to win. She always has to be on top. She's very dominating. She's very possessive, right? She's very selfish. Very, very, very selfish. These are all traits of a wounded feminine energy, right? And so I only say this because I've experienced it. So I'll tell you how I've experienced it. I've experienced it within myself, right? I have definitely been the wounded feminine energy, the toxic feminine, whatever you want to call it. I have operated from this before, right? Where I used to be so jealous of other women, constantly comparing myself to them, wanting to build positive relationships with women, but sabotaging them because I felt like I would never, be as good as them, or I felt like they were better than me, or I didn't feel good about myself. And I've done this in relationships as well, right? Where I have tried to possess or dominate the man in my relationship and try to own him in a sense, just for my own selfish reasons, because I'm afraid that this person will leave me. And so these are all traits of the wounded feminine. And when you get underneath the wounded feminine, it's just a woman who hasn't healed, right? It's a woman who hasn't healed. It's a woman who has consistently allowed her trauma to be the operator and the main operant power in her life, right? And so the wounded feminine can, ripple effect into many things. And so we're going to kind of get into this with my own personal experience. I won't be going so far into details, but I will be going into details enough that you understand what I'm saying. So the wounded feminine, you know, there's women that are just operating from their wounds, right? And so they display these character traits, right? Now, if you're operating as the wounded feminine and that starts to snowball and you're not actually dealing with whatever pain it is that you haven't dealt with for that long, you can turn into a very toxic feminine. And what I mean by this is you can be narcissistic, you can be manipulative, right? You start to snowball into these different things because you haven't really worked on the wounds and the pain and the trauma and the grief that's actually holding you back from rising into that divine feminine. And so now you're just operating from these wounds, but you're also suppressing them. And now you're using that power of suppression of yourself to abuse other people. And so I'll share my quick experience about, just about my experience with other wounded feminine in, sistership, relationships and things like that. So in terms of friendship, right, I've definitely experienced women who want to be my friends, but they're actually threatened by me, right? They're actually threatened by me because they're insecure about themselves, right? And again, I'm only speaking from experience and what I have also experienced personally, right? So the wounded feminine, right? These women, these toxic feminine energies, they were, losing train of thought. But they were, anyway, in our friendship, these women, would pretend to be my friends, but in all reality, they were threatened by me because they were insecure in themselves, right? They were insecure just through their own wounds, through their own wounding, their own pain, their own trauma, right? And I really want to make the distinction right now. The wounded feminine, the toxic feminine, right? Like there's a gap there because the wounded feminine is just a woman who hasn't healed and risen into her divine feminine power, right? But the toxic feminine is a woman who knows that she hasn't healed and uses that power to abuse other people, right? And likes to create this persona for herself to pretend that she's something that she's not, but it's really just a deep avoidance of the pain, right? So again, I was in this friendship with this woman who, on the outside, everybody loved her, right? On the outside, everybody thought she was this amazing person, and that she was like this really high spiritual leader, whatever, right? And after a few months of living with her, I really started to see that, she's actually operating from her wounded feminine energy, and she's a narcissist. Like, she's using this power to abuse other people to make them feel little about themselves. And so you start to notice like this wounded, toxic feminine energy when you start to get psychologically confused, right? When you start to feel like, is there something wrong with me? Am I being too harsh on this person? Am I doing this? Am I not doing that? Like, you start to get psychologically confused and drawn into the toxic feminine's patterns and her ways of manipulation and abuse and possession and domination, right? And so again, like I said, let's just be very clear. The wounded feminine and the toxic feminine, right? There's a gap there. But in order for this toxic feminine to actually take hold, she's operating from the wounded. So any woman that is, quote unquote, abusing you, or that's being manipulative and vindictive and resentful, she is still operating from her wounded feminine. It's just that the wounded feminine energy has now snowballed and manifested into this toxic feminine energy. So again, let's just go back to that. So again, this woman was definitely a total narcissist, and I didn't see it at the time. And I was putting her on a pedestal above myself because I'm like, she knows more than me and all these different things, right? But what it really came down to, what really showed me that she was actually abusive and she was toxic and she was a narcissist, was the way she spoke of God or the Creator or the Most High. She placed herself above, and everyone who didn't believe in her was therefore beneath her. And so I started to see these really manipulative ways that she would try to tell people, if you don't believe in me, then you don't believe in God. And it was very manipulative and psychologically abusive. And the toxic feminine will do this in relationships and friendships and business. She will do this. And I just want to remind you that she is operating from the wounded feminine, right? The wounded feminine is the little girl that was abused when she was a child, or that was silenced, or that was raped, whatever you can possibly imagine. It's this wounded feminine energy, or just simply the world we grow up in, right? The wounded feminine energy is that the feminine energy in general is constantly suppressed. And so you see these women who are wounded walking around, and these are some of the snowball effects it has, right? So it took me a while to like recognize that this person was really, really toxic and was not a real sister to me at all, but to also still have compassion because she is operating from a wounded feminine. I know that she's just another sister that's been abused, that's just been hurt, that's been let down, that's been through pain and trauma. And so I can choose to keep her at a distance, but also recognize at one point I was a wounded feminine as well, right? And there were things that I did that hurt other people. There were things that I did that hurt myself. There were things that I did that weren't righteous or holy, right? And so I had to like move from this place of judging her so much to a place of like, oh, I understand where you're coming from. Like, I understand that you're suppressing and you're avoiding your pain, you're avoiding your grief, and you would rather just bypass it than to just feel it. And so for you, the way of dealing with it is by trying to conquer and have control over other people. I understand, right? And that's how like the wounded feminine snowballs into the toxic feminine if she's not healed, if she's not actively healing herself, right? Or I wouldn't say actively healing, but I would just say if she isn't actively aware or conscious of these states that are within her, then it snowballs into the toxic feminine. I'm going to take a sip of tea real quick. So I really just want to put this out there because one, I have been the wounded feminine, right? Two, I have experienced wounded feminine in my life. My mother was a wounded feminine energy. And I've also experienced toxic feminine and narcissistic feminine, right? These are all abusive traits that really all just stem back from the wounded feminine energy. And so growing up, right, with my mom, she was this constant wounded feminine energy of lack, of insecurity, of everybody's out to get me, of I'm not as good as the other person, or I need to sell my body away to this man. And so I grew up thinking that way. I grew up, my mother was the first example of how to love myself, right? As a woman. She was the first example I ever saw of how to love myself. And so I really took that on subconsciously and started acting that way as I became a teenager. I was like a young teenager, and I was doing everything I possibly could in terms of like constantly trying to be with this man or this boy or whatever it was. And it even snowballed into when I got older, I started kind of to date older men thinking that, okay, maybe they understand me more. But then I started to really see that I was just like repeating my mother's patterns, right? And I was really just operating from this wounded feminine experience. And you'll notice it is very prominent because the wounded feminine doesn't believe in herself. She doesn't believe in her power. She doesn't believe in her power to create, right? And so when the wounded feminine is operating from her pain and from her trauma in this way, it very easily snowballs into a toxic feminine. So I'm really bringing this up for awareness because as women, we like to constantly blame and point the finger at men. However, women are just as responsible. Women are just as responsible. Women are just as abusive. I see how abusive women have been. I've experienced it personally within my family, within friends. I've experienced how abusive women can be. And just because she's a woman, some people will be like, oh, that's not who she really is. I really believe her, right? Because she can, bat her eyes and lick her lips, and someone will be like, all right, she's a woman, right? And I've seen this happen time and time again, especially in the spiritual community. So I just really wanted to bring awareness to this because I literally just came, out of a situation where this person was, viewed as this holy, divine, feminine energy, but that was just her viewers viewing her from a distance through a screen. They never actually met her in person or lived with her. And so I watched every single day how she treated people, how she abused her relationships, and how she was very manipulative, and how at the end of the day, she was really just operating from her own wounded feminine energy. She was operating from grief. And so obviously, right, you reflect that which you are, you reflect what you only are feeling and what you are inside of yourself. And so clearly I manifested this person into my life to learn a lesson. It was a reflection of, nay, Where are you still allowing your wounded feminine to dominate your life? You need to heal this, right? And so it was a huge reflection, and it was also a really big heartbreak, because this was a person that I was really considering building a womb healing business with, right? And, you know, we like had documents signed and everything. And it just really turned out that I had to let go of this old version of myself. And I really had to let it go and realize this woman is not sacred. She is not holy. She's very abusive and manipulative. And I need to remove myself from this. And I really pray and I wish her the best. But essentially, like, I have to let this go, right? And so this was a woman that I was really, really like passionate. I was like this with her, right? And then I saw all the toxic traits that she had. I saw all the abusive traits that she had. I saw how she was abusing me and multiple other people, and how she was using this energy to manipulate in the spiritual force. And so I was like, this is not sacred to me. This doesn't align with an integrity with me. So I literally had to switch everything. I had basically a whole life kind of planned out with this person in terms of work and business. And I had to really let that go. And it was the biggest lesson for me, because I was so wrapped up in the glory and the fantasy of, ooh, like she's what I want to be, right? And I wasn't really honoring who I am. And so I got trapped up in her stuff, just to realize, oh, you have a lot of pain you have not dealt with, sister. And when I brought it up to her, and when I tried to hold space for her in this, you know, in that time, she really just rejected it and deflected it. And so everyone outside of her became the problem. She was never wrong. Everyone became the blame. Everyone became the reason, right? And so this is what a toxic, wounded feminine will do. She will make everyone else her target. She will make everyone else the blame, the reason why she is the way that she is. And so it's never really this place of accountability, you know? And like I said, it really starts to come in when you start to psychologically start getting confused. You know something is off. There's some red flags, right? And the gaslighting, right? Like, these are a whole bunch of things that I could go into, but I really want to touch on what the divine feminine is as well. But I really just wanted to bring out what this energy of the wounded feminine, only from a place of experience, right? I'm not trying to, you know, preach or he say, she say. It's literally just from a place of experience of what I experienced with this person and what I've experienced within myself and my own relationships and friendships and all that kind of stuff, right? So anyway, yeah, I got away from that person and just kind of broke out on my own and realized that, you know, my business is my own and that it is my sacred creation that I must really just create on my own at this point. And you know, I know women that are still holding on to their wounds, right? I know women personally that are still holding on to their wounds and that are still operating from that space, but I see them like doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're trying and they're being honest and they're taking accountability, right? That's a difference. That's a huge difference. I'm not saying that all women that are wounded are not whatever, right? I'm saying that there's a difference between a wounded feminine that's abusing her power to manipulate, control, dominate, and possess. And then there's a difference between a wounded feminine who's aware that she has traumatic pain that she needs to heal, and she is doing her best every day to work through that, right? Like, that's a very real thing. So I'm just gonna take a pause and take some more tea here. And we're just going to really start just moving into the divine feminine now, so that you can kind of just get a whole complete picture of this. The divine feminine. A lot of people use the word divine very loosely. The word divine or divinity is holy. And when I say that, I mean it's like the purest of the pure, right? So when you are claiming to be divine feminine or divine masculine or divine or divinity in whatever way, when you are saying those words, you are claiming such pure holiness and righteousness, which I believe we all are, right? So a lot lately, especially in the spiritual community, divine feminine and divine masculine have just been tossed out as like this trend, right? The word divine has become a trend, but divine actually means purity. It means holiness. It means righteousness. It's an embodiment, not a word. Right? It's an embodied energy taking form, not a word. And so the divine feminine is a totally different wavelength than the wounded feminine. The divine feminine knows her power, right? She knows her power. She knows her truth. She knows her sexual energy. She treats her sacred energy as holy, right? She's not using her sexual energy to manipulate or dominate men, right? She's not out here speaking ill of men constantly, right? Oh, he ain't nothing. He ain't good. He's da 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 da. Like, no, she's not doing that because that's not divine, right? And so I'll just go back real quick. Another thing about the wounded feminine, toxic feminine, narcissistic feminine energy, from the jump, she is very hypersexual in the sense that she will want to use her sexual energy to dominate a situation, a relationship, a person, whatever it may be. She will like overdo it in a sense, not like women who are open and who are sexual and who love their energy and know who they are, that they're divine goddesses. But I'm talking about a woman who uses her sex from a place of wounding, from a place of attachment, from a place of, I need to make sure that they never leave me, right? That's a total different vibe. So again, back to the divine feminine. She understands her sexual energy is sacred and that it's holy. She doesn't just allow anyone in there. She's not giving away her sexual energy to every and any person. She also knows the maturity of cultivating her sexual energy internally. She doesn't need to constantly be having sex or having multiple partners in order to fulfill whatever it is she's trying to fulfill, right? She knows that her sexual energy is sacred and that it is to be used for that purpose only, right? And so she can control her sexual desires. She can control, and she is mature with her sexual desires. She's not just having sex with anyone, right? Another thing, the jealousy, the competition, there is none of that, right? There is none of that in the divine feminine, because if you know that you're God or the creator of the universe, if you know that you're divine, right, that means you're already full. That means you're already whole, which therefore means you don't need to go and try to steal something from someone else or compete with someone else, because you already have that which you need, right? And so the divine feminine is not trying to compete or seek or take from other people, relationships, men, women. She's not trying to take from other people what she thinks that she needs, right? She is not looking at people as an outside source to fill her up. She is whole, she is holy, and she is sacred in her own energy, and she is mature and responsible with it, right? Very responsible with it. And she knows how to have fun with her energy, right? She's not interested in suppressing her creativity, because she understands that's an expression of her form, right? And I don't mean like, you know, women that are shy to start singing or speaking or whatever like that. I'm simply talking about like, so sometimes as women, we get really caught up in the hustle and grind, right? We get very, very caught up and we got to grind, we got to hustle, we got to bust, we got to do all this stuff. And I totally get that. But we also were really brought up with that is the only way to get what you want in this world. And that it's a dog eat dog world, right? We were taught that. And so that was a subconscious programming as women that we took on, that we have to work 20 times as hard as a man to get what we want, right? And I'm not saying that there isn't truth of this, right? I'm not saying that there isn't truth of this in our society and in our environment. But what I'm saying is we as women, as divine feminine, need to get rid of the hustle and grind. Because hustle and grind is all good until it's not, right? What about flow and ease? What about receiving? What about I take my time? What about, wow, I don't have to work hard just to get a result? What about I'm open, I'm receptive, and because of my divinity and because I stand in this power, everything is fun. Everything now becomes playful. Everything now becomes joyful, versus I gotta crunch and I gotta stress and I gotta do all these things and work. We know the divine feminine understands that her creative power is so infinite and abundant that she can create anything that she wants in her life, right? And therefore that implies that she does not need to work 100+ hours a week just to make her reality real, right? And again, I'm only speaking from experience, right? Like sometimes we think that the harder we go on a topic or the harder we go on a project, that the better it's going to be and the quicker the result will be. And that's not always true. Sometimes you stress yourself out mentally and psychologically and emotionally trying to just get that one result, versus if you just lay back for a second and know when to pause, know when to rest, know when to receive and give to yourself, right? And that's what I mean when I say she's mature with her energy. She's responsible with her energy. She's aware of her energy, right? I definitely believe that, like, right, for example, when I'm in an inspired place, right, instead of me feeling like I have to take hustle and grind, everything that I do has to come from inspired action, right? Not from a place of I have to do this, but from a place of I want to do this, and therefore I'm about to go do it, right? Inspired action, not action of I have to do this, I must do this, this is a burden and a weight on me, but inspired action, which therefore implies and ripple effects into my creative energy is bubbling with excitement, and therefore I could sit there all day and work on a project because I was so inspired to do it, that now I'm not just doing it because I feel like I have to, but because I thoroughly enjoy it and I want to. That's a total different vibe, right? And so that's what I mean when I say hustle and grind. I'm not telling you to sit back and do nothing and be lazy, right? I'm talking about we don't need to be hustle and grind all the time, right? That's not divine feminine in my eyes, right? So like take what feels good and leave the rest, right? But that's not divine feminine in my eyes. I believe in inspired action because when I get passionate about something and when it inspires me, I could sit for weeks working on a project and be so excited with what I'm doing and have so much fun doing it, right? Versus telling myself I have to do this, right? And when I put that pressure on myself, then I'm therefore creating that reality for myself. But inspired action towards a creative project allows me to receive more. It allows me to have fun. It allows me to be joyful. It allows me to be playful, right? And so we got to get out of this hustle and grind mode. We have to, because if we're staying in this hustle and grind, we're creating hardship on ourselves. We're telling ourselves we have to work 100+ hours a week just to get a result. When divine feminine energy says, no, you don't. You can take inspired action and have fun and love what you're doing and have playfulness with it and create from a place of inspiration and passion versus a place of I have to do this, because that's the mentality we grew up with, right? That subconscious belief is you have to go to school, you have to work a 9 to 5, you have to go to college, you have to do this in order to have a good life, right? That's what we grew up with. And so now I'm just like bringing like just awareness that that's not actually how it works. If you assume that to be true, then it's true. Absolutely. If you believe and assume that you have to work this or that or do this amount of times just to get this result, then it's absolutely true. But if you assume that actually this is going to be fun for me, this is going to be so amazing, I'm going to learn so much, I'm going to be so inspired and fired up while I'm doing this, I'm going to have so much fun, this is going to be creative as hell, wow, I can't wait to get started. Like, that's a total different vibration, right? Now you're taking inspired action and you're having fun loving what you do versus I got to hustle and grind, right? Because that's also this mindset of dog eat dog world, and it keeps us in that mentality. It keeps us in this mentality of competition, right? But if you know yourself as divine feminine and as a whole feminine, there's nothing to compete for. Why would you need to seek outside of yourself if everything is right here that you need? There's nothing to go and obtain out there, right? So again, like I said earlier, like the wounded feminine versus the divine feminine. The wounded feminine is she's operating from her pain. She's operating from her trauma. And I really just wanted to bring awareness to this because as women, like I said, we like to blame and point the finger at men all the time. But we need to take responsibility and accountability for ourselves. Like, sis, are you operating from your wounded feminine too? Right? Are you trying to dominate, possess, control, manipulate, abuse, right? And this is more so getting into toxic feminine and narcissistic feminine energy, right? But all that energy is still operating from the wounded feminine. Why? When you look at the wounded feminine, it's just a little girl. It's a little girl that's been abused, that's been silenced, that's been told she's ugly, that's been bullied, that's been belittled. It's this little girl that's been told she is worthless, right? And I'm only speaking from experience because this was me. Like I said, I operated from my wounded feminine for years of this victim mentality of everyone's out to get me and being jealous of other women. Why? If I know that I'm a divine feminine, there's nothing to be jealous of. I'm going to uplift sis because she's inspiring me even more and she's a reflection of me. So therefore, why would I not lift her up? Right? Like, we be trying to compete with other women so much. Why? There's no reason for us to compete with other women at all, right? When you uplift somebody else, you're only uplifting yourself, right? So I just wanted to share like part of this story that I had in the last few months about this really toxic feminine energy that I was building a business with, essentially. And it really just like, it broke my heart when I realized like, you're very abusive. You're very abusive, and I no longer want this in my life. Like, I'm done with this. And I had recreated that reality, right? Because I was so used to the way that my mom treated me, right? Like I said earlier, my mom was the first woman to teach me how to love myself. And so I therefore treated myself as that image that I learned through my mother subconsciously. And so I always valued myself as less than other women, that they had more than me, that they were smarter, right? That they were prettier, that they were more talented or more gifted, and all these different things. And it was absolutely ridiculous, but that's just how I grew up. And so when I started to address my wounded feminine, I started to realize it was just this little girl that was abused, who was literally screaming and crying for me to pay attention to her. And because I kept suppressing and ignoring her, I started to create really toxic relationships and friendships in my life. I started to have a life where I felt like I needed to slave myself away for money, right? Like, all these different things. And so I created a life of dis-ease. I created a life of pain and frustration, of poverty, versus being in my divine feminine energy and knowing that my sexual energy is sacred, right? Not out here having sex with everybody, doing all these kinds of things, right? Because your sexual energy is powerful and it is holy and it is to be respected and treated as such, right? And realizing that I don't need to suffer just to make a buck. I don't need to suffer. This can be fun. This can be joyful. This can be pleasurable. This can be creative. This can be easy. This can be exactly as I want it to be, right? But I have to move away from the old conscious programming. I have to move away from the wounded feminine. I have to address the wounds and begin to move and break away from that. And most times we're stuck in that wounded feminine consciousness because there's a glass ceiling, like I was saying the other day. We can't see past the consciousness of which we are at this moment. And so therefore we need to be conscious of being whatever it is that we want to be, right? We need to recognize we're already this thing, which is the divine feminine in this case. Recognize we're already the divine feminine, right? And we can't like rely on our human minds to be doing all this work, right? Like believing in a higher power, knowing that there is a higher power inside of yourself, right? The God within you already answered all your prayers, right? So like, for example, if I have a business idea and I have a dream for this business to take off in the next 6 months or whatever it is, right? I can't say I want my business to take off in the next 6 months, or I can't say I, want to have a healthy relationship and then still stay stuck in my wounded feminine ways. That they don't match. Those vibrations don't match. So I'm going to keep recreating that which I believe myself to already be. So in order for me to have a booming business in 6 months, or have that relationship that I want, or create more sacred sisterhood around me, whatever it is that I want, right? As a divine feminine essence, in order for me to do that, I need to be willing to let go of this. Whatever this wounded pain is that's down here, I need to be willing to completely drop it and to be open and receptive to learning something new. And to be open and receptive to receiving something new, and to be open and receptive to maybe I don't know everything, and maybe I need to unlearn some things, and I need to allow myself to hear the wisdom of my own voice, because clearly this pain is coming up for a reason, right? Clearly I'm struggling for a reason, right? And that's only a signal telling you yourself, your higher self is communicating to you, we're not happy. We want something to change. Excuse me. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having those constant emotions of something's not the way I want it to be, or why am I so frustrated when I do this work, or I don't believe in myself, or I don't have this, right? Those things wouldn't be coming up if there wasn't already a solution to match. Otherwise, they just wouldn't even exist, right? So when you have those things come up, it's because a solution already exists. And as a divine feminine, you have this power within yourself, this holy sacredness within yourself, right? And so we have to really let go of these wounds, of this trauma, right? Because otherwise, what are you doing? You're carrying baggage. As a woman, you are carrying baggage. You got 30, 50, 40, 60, 80, 100 pounds of your trauma and pain on your back. And now you're carrying that into your next friendship. You're carrying that into your business. You're carrying that into your relationships. You're carrying that into your future. You're passing that on to your kids, right? You're carrying this weight around for what? Just take the backpack off, sis. Make it lighter for yourself, right? Like, and I think sometimes we think we have to carry the trauma because we also identify and associate ourselves with it, right? And we think that's who we are. And that's not who we are. That's an experience that we went through, right? But what you actually are is the divine feminine energy. And so again, like I said before, I'm not like bringing shame to the wounded feminine energy, because I was the wounded feminine, right? For a very long time, for years. What I'm bringing awareness to is how the wounded feminine can manifest and ripple effect into toxic feminine, into an abusive feminine, and not just of others, but of yourself, right? And so it's very important to address the wounded feminine, because if you're manifesting women in your life that are abusive and that are this, it actually just means that you haven't really worked through the wounds of your feminine energy. And in this world, in this day and age, the feminine energy is constantly suppressed. We are constantly told we have to work hard to do it this way. It's a male dominant world. Everything is rigid, right? There's a lot of things have not been fun and easy and flowing and exciting and passionate and creative and playful and joyful, right? These are all signs of the feminine energy. And so when we grow up in that type of world as women, we think that we have to be that way, right? We think we have to take on these characteristics and traits. And so we become resistant to the feminine energy of ease and flow. And so we get trapped in the hustle and grind, right? And hustle and grind is different from inspired action. Inspired action is like soul-filled and passionate and heart-centered, right? Versus hustle and grind is I have to do this, I must. And it's this energy of pressure and all this stuff, right? So again, I just really wanted to come on here and bring the awareness of what's the difference between the wounded feminine and what's the difference between the divine feminine. And the actual, you can just feel inside of your body the total difference from the beginning of this video, how I was expressing the wounded feminine and how that ripples effects into our lives, into the divine feminine, right? She doesn't need to take. She doesn't need to dominate. She doesn't need to possess or own or manipulate or abuse. She doesn't need to do any of those things, because she knows who she is. She's full and whole inside of herself. The only reason a woman wants to compete, or she's jealous, or she's bitter, or resentful, or feels like she needs to possess you, or own you, or take from you, or steal from you, is if she feels that she's less than her divinity, as if she's still operating from that wounded feminine, as if she has not come into wholeness and completion with herself and her true divine nature, right? So I just really hope this really spreads some awareness today, because this was something I really struggled with for a long time, of like constantly comparing myself to other women. Oh, look at where she's at. Why can't I be there? And blah, 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 blah. These were all still wounded feminine energies, right? And like I said, the first person who taught me how to love myself as a woman was my mother. And so I subconsciously took that on as a kid, right? But now I'm going to be 25 this year. It's nobody else's life but mine, and nobody else is responsible for it but me. And so how long am I going to continue to blame and point the finger outside of myself, right? It starts within. And if I'm not happy with my life or my reality, then it's up to me to change my life and change my reality. And that means addressing my wounds. And it's not from a place of I'm blaming myself. It's from a place of, okay, this happened to me as a kid, and I was abused as a young little girl. And that was not my fault. However, I'm going to take responsibility for my life today as a woman. I'm going to realize that these experiences do not shape my life anymore. They hold no power over me because I know my divinity, and my divinity can never be tainted, can never be harmed, can never be stolen. And so I'm going to use those experiences as lessons, as teachings, as wisdom. And I'm going to reclaim the truth of my divine nature, right? So anyway, thanks to those that tuned into this. This was a really beautiful topic for today. I really just wanted to touch on it and touch on my personal experience of dealing with toxic feminine sisters of other women that are really abusive. And I really wanted to highlight that and bring awareness to that because, like I said, women, we like to point the finger and blame men, but there's a lot of women in this world that are equally as abusive and manipulative and toxic, whether that's friendship, whether that's your mom or an auntie or a family member or in a romantic relationship. There are women that are toxic, and we need to start bringing awareness and addressing this and realizing that it's just this little girl inside of us that's wounded, and she's just asking for our attention. And so if we suppress her, she's going to react in our physical reality and our current reality by all these different things. She's going to do all these different tactics of trying to get our attention and our awareness. So moving from the wounded feminine to the divine whole feminine that you already are, and allow yourself to be inspired and curious about that. What does divine feminine feel like inside of your body? If you were the ideal optimal woman that you wanted to be, what does she look like? What does she feel like? What are the things that she's saying? How does she speak to herself and speak to others? How does she present herself? What is her daily task or her daily routine, right? What does her life look like as a whole divine feminine, right? Get in tune with that, get in touch with that, because that's where your answers are, right? It's not going to be through anybody else telling you what the divine feminine is. It's you asking yourself, what does divine feminine feel and look like for me, right? So anyway, thank you for those that tuned in. This was a really, really special one for me. I really enjoyed talking about this because it definitely raises a lot of awareness. And thank you for all the hearts and love in there. It raises a lot of awareness. And I really feel like this doesn't have to be a shaming journey of oh, I'm still operating from my wounds. Nah, sis, it doesn't need to be that, right? It's just about radical accountability and responsibility of okay, maybe I'm still operating from some wounds and this needs to be cleaned up. This needs to be healed. And moving from a place of love with that, right? Being the mother that you wish you had, right? If you were like me and you grew up with an abusive mother, be the mother now for yourself that you wish you had when you were a child. And that might be hard as fuck. That might be really hard, right? But it'll be the greatest act of self-love that you ever choose to do. The greatest act of self-love. Be that mother for yourself now, right? And there will be another video where I'll get into the mother wound and the father wound as well, because those are huge. But I don't want to go off onto a tangent. This one was just really sticking with the wounded feminine versus the divine feminine. So anyway, thank you for those that tuned in. I'm really excited to post this one on all my stories because I really loved it. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this was really valuable information for you. If it was, please comment, share it with a friend, whatever feels resonant for you. But thank you so much. And I hope you all have such a beautiful day.